I was trying to get hold of his dad, but he didn't pick up.
Okay, sir. We're just calling everyone. Now it's being streamed live on YouTube.
I have sent the live streaming link on your chat box. Please check it and share it among yourself.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Organizing team members, please share it. Kuldeep and the others, please share it. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Pramesh.
Good evening, Anubha. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I am
Good
doing
evening.
reasonably well.
Jenny ma'am was also here. Good evening, ma'am.
That's my background.
Very nice.
Hi, everyone.
Akshay Tandon sir is here. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, hi guys. Hi. Good evening.
Hi, Akshay. Good to hear you. This is Pramesh.
Hi, sir. How are you?
Doing reasonably well. In the hills. See the backdrop.
Nice. Oh, lovely. That looks great. I just wanted to quickly test out my presentation.
Yes, sir.
So will we be giving some time to for people to join and stuff like that? When do we start?
Yes, sir. People are just joining in. Maybe we can start within 5 minutes, sir.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys see this?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Okay, cool. So we'll give it a couple of minutes and we'll you let me know when you want to start. I'll put my video and mic on.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, all right.
Sir, may we begin? Rohit, sir?
Yeah, we can begin, Sneha. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
We can begin. I think Akshay Tandon
Yeah.
sir left in between, right?
No, sir, he is here.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay. Then
Hi.
I think we can start.
We're so happy to have you here, sir. To begin this event, I would like to invite Nandana PR, the Vice President of ZES, the Literary Society of the Department of English, Deen Dayal Upadhyay College, University of Delhi, to deliver the welcome address. Nandana, please.
Yes, it's an honor to deliver the welcome address. Good evening, everyone. I, Nandana PR, Vice President of ZEST, the Literary Society of the Department of English, Deen Dayal Upadhyay College, University of Delhi, welcome you all to fourth session of ZEST Lecture Series 2021, Post-Pandemic World from Pandemonium to Paradise, titled SolarPunk and My Experiments with Net Positive Living. I heard this quote a while ago. A true entrepreneur is a doer, not a dreamer. And yes, today we have an entrepreneur who wears many hats. President and co-owner of FC Goa, founder and chairman of Fosa Goa Foundation, strategic advisor, business consultant, and whatnot. Truly speaking, we have a versatile man who never fails to take up the challenges of life. Karma, a creative agency based in Mumbai, was co-founded by him with the purpose of bringing together creative professionals from all over the world to create meaningful communities around big ideas. He is also an investor in Big Scale, an intelligent operations platform popular among businesses in the restaurant, retail, and commercial sectors. A completely goal-oriented man who always tends to build up something new with his trademark, is currently striving to construct a football-focused campus in Goa with the purpose of creating players for the country to compete in the World Cup. Valiantly overcoming challenges and vibrantly taking up the new ones. We have for today's session Mr. Akshay Tandon. We are extremely honored and privileged to have you with us today, sir. On behalf of the Department of English, Deen Dayal Upadhyay College, University of Delhi, I earnestly welcome you to this session, SolarPunk and My Experiments with Net Positive Living. We welcome you, sir.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Nandana, for that lovely introduction. I haven't been a speaker at an event in a long time because of the pandemic. So for the first time in a while, I would say I'm a bit nervous. But Dr. Pramesh, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. I'd like to thank Sneha for putting up with my lack of responsiveness and being very patient as, like to set this whole thing up. And thank you all for attending. So I'm going to talk about SolarPunk. It's a topic I've actually never spoken about before, and I thought I'd challenge myself. And sorry, just one second. I just want to set up the screen for myself. I came about this concept of SolarPunk a few months back, but as I sort of went through it and discovered whatever content was out there about it, I realized that it's something that's actually very close to my heart and I can completely sort of relate to it. So let me get started. I'll try and make this about 25 minutes or so, and then take up your questions or whatever things you might ask. For the last 20, 30, 40 years, or perhaps ever since the industrial age sort of came about, we've been living in this world of consumerism. Recently, there's the pandemic. All of you are fairly young, so I'm sure a lot of you sort of relate with the climate change and the climate anxiety that sort of comes with it. We're living in a world with perhaps a lot of sort of challenges in terms of who I am, what do I have to become, will I be able to buy everything I want to buy, will I be able to achieve everything I want to achieve. But even if I achieve everything I want to achieve, will climate change kind of destroy the world by the time I'm old or by the time I want to have kids? There's a lot of anxiety that sort of lives within, each one of us today. And, we have extreme role models. We have Elon Musk, a hero for many, has been for me for a very long time as an entrepreneur. And we have Greta Thunberg, who's, now an extreme sort of climate activist. And, but at the same time, also extremely sort of unrelatable, both on opposite spectrums of solutions, but none that any of us feel like, we can start sort of working on immediately ourselves. And, capitalism and consumerism has created this sense that we're living in this world of, never having enough. Like I'm sure many of you sort of relate to this. My biggest irritation with myself is the amount of time I find myself spending on my phone. I pick up my phone without even thinking about it, like many of us probably do when we start scrolling Instagram or Facebook or news or whatever it might be. And it just feels like, the world is sort of taking over my thoughts, my consumption habits. It's telling me what to do. It's telling me how to do it. In fact, I personally moved to Goa about 6 years ago, and that was just to get out of the city. Like to get out of this pattern of feeling like you need to constantly chase something. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I owned my time rather than the city owning my time. So like, let me get to the topic at hand. Being a punk is been something which has been a derogatory sort of term. Like if you're a punk, you're someone who doesn't conform, who doesn't listen to the norms. We all have our sort of pop culture references of punk. Punk rock being the absolute sort of most popular one. And, we have these stereotypes of what it is to be a punk. And it's basically someone who doesn't listen, who doesn't conform, who doesn't sort of accept things for the way they are, right? Like a punk person, say in punk rock, sort of wears jewelry which is which is made out of just like basic metals as opposed to something super expensive. But the whole idea is just to rebel against, whatever society is sort of telling you to do. And of course, like the, pop culture has made it seem like angry, disillusioned, like a violent kind of behavior on what is a person. And there've been other sort of punks, sort of subcultures. If any of you is a gamer, you probably heard of this really popular game that sort of came out recently called Cyberpunk. And all of them sort of paint a very dystopian kind of future, like where sort of neon lights are on 24/7. There's many types of punk, sort of punk subcultures that have come up. There's steampunk, cyberpunk, diesel punk, there's atom punk, and they're all very sort of dystopian. And I think the reason for that is because until now, if we were to sort of just play out the current trends of society, right? The rising inequality, the changing climate, the rise in consumerism. If you play it out 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years down, 200 years down, 500 years down, there aren't many sort of solutions that are being put out for the vast majority of people. Yes, of course, if you're rich, if you're part of the haves, you have a lot of options and you probably would have a great life. But for most people, the have-nots, the future seems pretty bleak. But I would say like that's somewhat until recently, right? Like until recently, even until like 5 years ago, when I had started doing some of my experiments, like we spoke to someone about solar, you spoke to someone about renewable energy, they would say, oh, it's great, but you know what? It's not economically viable. It's not feasible. It doesn't fit into the capitalist sort of model, doesn't fit into capitalist structures. But the truth is today, it's become all of a sudden very, very sort of realistic. We are now able to start imagining a future where everybody can have everything that they want without it destroying the planet, without it destroying the environment, without it creating more inequality, and without it chasing this sort of tale of conspicuous consumerism that we've all been taught is almost like an inevitable conclusion of development and growth and capitalism. And that's where like the sort of new subculture, I think like the first mention of the word SolarPunk comes in about 2008. And like I'll just refer to a quote over here where SolarPunk is a movement in speculative fiction, art, fashion, and activism that seeks to answer and embody the question, what does a sustainable civilization look like? And how can we get there? Of course, this image, Ali, you guys can see my screen all right?
Yes,
the presentation. Is the idea of how do we create a society and how do we create a civilization? How do we create communities where everybody has everything they need without having that need of depending on, let's say, a government or a larger global society? I mean, that doesn't mean that we're not going to be integrated, but today energy can be produced in a decentralized way. Food can be produced in a decentralized way in localized farms. Waste can be managed locally. Water can be sort of captured and harvested and managed in it, again, like a decentralized way. So can we imagine a society where life is community driven, where life is equitable, where everybody is sort of welcome, where artisans and workmen and artists are sort of celebrated, and where humans are allowed to connect with nature and nature is allowed to grow, but without really making any compromises, while just having a better view of what our lifestyle could sort of be. I mean, an example of this that I kind of use is, in early 2000s, I guess most of you were quite young then, the first sort of sustainable car that sort of came out was the Prius, right? The Toyota Prius. It was an electric car, which was like a hybrid car. And that was a choice of, say, becoming green or having a sustainable access to something. Whereas when the Tesla came out, all of a sudden it was an upgrade to an existing car. It didn't feel like you were making any compromises. It didn't feel like you were giving up anything. And that's what the SolarPunk movement sort of all about. It's about creating and imagining a world where you're not making any compromises for the sake of nature, for the sake of sustainability. We're able to live harmoniously with nature and still achieve your dreams, still live in a technologically advanced society. For me personally, and I'll get to some of my work now, I was in 13 schools growing up. My dad was an IAS officer. After my 12 schools, I went to Kodaikanal International School, which is a national school in South India, where there were kids from about 30 countries that go there. And then I went to Boston to do my undergrad at Boston University. And then I came back and I was very jaded myself. I studied entrepreneurship and finance, but I was very jaded with the financial world. And I came back and I started a not-for-profit called the Freedom of Expression Movement. And within that not-for-profit, for one of my projects, we were donating solar lanterns to school kids in Ladakh, around Leh. And while I was there, I kind of realized that, communities, sort of rural communities especially, already live in a very sustainable way. But unfortunately, they have the aspiration of living in concrete and steel and glass sort of houses or buildings and towers, right? Like this is what a typical rural home in India kind of looks like today. And I quickly realized that for these people to become sustainable, you don't actually need much. It's for all of us that live in cities that are using cars every day, like that are using air conditioners every day, that are flying around all the time, that are shopping on a regular basis. We are actually, it'll be much harder for us to move to a sustainable, net positive kind of lifestyle. Whereas for the average rural villager, if we can find a way to create an aspiration for them not to want this, for me, which is a jaded city life, but to want something, like how can we leapfrog them into wanting a sort of sustainable lifestyle while skipping this concrete household aspiration, and one of the projects that an architect friend of mine recently did was this thing called the Power Height Home. Now this home has a huge solar panel on top of it, as you can see over here. And it produces, say, only 10% of the electricity that it produces is required by the house. The 90% of the electricity that it actually produces is used, and is sent back to the grid, and it's used to finance the development of this house. Right. So it's a very small way in which, and this is a concept of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of an idea of how we can, create a sustainable community or sustainable village while giving dignity, a great home to poor communities, but at the same time, doing so in a sustainable way. And once you have a home like this, you can eventually build a community like this, right? And of course, this is at the lower income group. Another example I have is from another architect, from another Dutch architect. In fact, the first one was from an architect called Robert, who's doing a project for mine. I'll show you that later. And this is from another architect called Bjarke Ingels, who runs an architecture firm called Big. And there's a TED talk on this called Floating Cities. You guys should check it out. So this is a floating city. This is a first sort of pilot project for it that was done a couple of years ago. Now they're building something like this in the river in Paris for the Paris Olympics. And what it is these are some pictures, but the idea essentially is that you could have, even in a climate apocalyptic world, you could build a fully sustainable self sort of regenerative community, in the water, that produces its own food, that produces its own energy, that produces its own water, that has its own sort of common spaces and a great sort of lifestyle for its residents. Sorry, this animation's a bit slow. Built very sustainably and can eventually be made into sorry. Yeah. Yeah, so it has something like that is below the surface of the water, that creates energy, that creates food. You have a sort of bio farms, algae farms, and eventually that, I won't get into the details of all of it. So you have a small island like this on which you have 300 residents. You have a cluster where you could have about 1,600 residents. You could have a collection where you have 10,000 citizens, and eventually a floating city where you have 2.2 million citizens across a 37-kilometer sort of diameter and radius. And this is like a render of that. In fact, I know that Bjarke Ingels is planning something like this already for the few governments around the world, especially governments of countries that are island nations. Here's a project that I started in Goa. It is a project that I was working on for many years to basically figure out, is it possible to build a gated community along the lines of sustainable principles, where everything from so I'll explain this sort of diagram in detail. Everything from, okay, like how do we build without cutting the hill too much? You can see my mouse over here, so we build into the hill. How do we make sure that all the gray water from the site is sort of treated on site and then used for landscaping? How do we create green spaces to create sort of microclimates and manage the temperature of the overall site? Ensuring segregation and composting that's happening as well. In the common areas, can we create hydroponic systems and aquaponic systems for growing food that can be used by the residents of the sites? Having the whole site be a large rainwater harvesting sort of piece of land where all the water is kind of retained and nothing kind of washes off. You have solar for energy, of course. You have battery backups for like energy at night. Unfortunately, this project I'm no longer doing. We're selling the piece of land, but I'm doing other projects like this on a slightly smaller scale. Here's another project that I'm doing in Bambolim in Goa. Eventually, it will look like this. I'm hoping to launch it sometime next year. The idea is, again, can we create projects that are inspirational, that are hopeful, that are sustainable, that kind of become examples of how a sustainable future can be achieved while still living in this sort of consumeristic, capitalistic sort of, world. So this is a project where we're building 90 apartments. I'll be launching it hopefully next summer in July. Now these are the technologies that we are sort of looking to industrialize, where rammed earth is essentially mud houses, but stabilized rammed earth is how we can, build in an industrialized sort of large scale way as well, which is 70% sort of soil, 15% concrete, 15% sort of lime and lime plaster and water. And, all of a sudden you have this beautiful, very sustainable, non-concrete heavy material, which can be scaled up in a very, very, very beautiful way. The reason why it's not very scaled up in India right now is because no one has sort of industrialized the use of rammed earth and they can scale it up. That's what, that's another project I'm working on. If you guys have sort of, heard about permaculture, but permaculture is essentially allowing the land to be regenerative. All of us have seen these beautiful lawns and gardens, but unfortunately, most of the landscaping that happens, for example, you see beautiful landscaping at a 5-star hotel. The trees that are planted are not native to, say, the area that they are. In Goa, for example, where I am, you have a lot of palms that are being used. These beautiful fishtail palms and things that are very, very famous. But those are originally from Bali, and in Bali it rains sort of throughout the year, 365 days of the year. Whereas while it rains the same amount as it does in Goa and Bombay, it rains throughout the year. Whereas we get all our rain in 4 months. So in a place like Goa, we end up using a lot more water to keep these plants alive throughout the rest of the year when it's not monsoon. It's not actually a sustainable way, even though it looks very green, it looks very lush. It's not necessarily like a great way to do things. So permaculture techniques is what we are trying to implement to have native, local plants that are used in landscaping that may not be the prettiest plants, but will be there throughout the year and don't require that kind of watering. I won't get into other details of these techniques, but everything from water management to how water and sewage and waste is managed on site is like a challenges that we are sort of giving ourselves in terms of how do we build a sustainable eco community kind of like like what I showed you, without compromising on the luxury or without anyone feeling like, oh, because this is a sustainable house, like I have to make all these compromises. 10 years ago, people would say, okay, if you want to live in a sustainable house, you can't have air conditioning. But that's not necessarily very reasonable. This, I know it's a bit confusing, but this is actually a design of, you guys see this sort of green wall over here at the bottom left?
Yes, sir.
So that actually is a green wall, which is filtering, which is filtering the water because the water sort of pumped up and it filters through. So the roots of these plants actually filter the water and it creates a swimming pool, which doesn't require chlorine or a external filtration process. Why would you say that important is because in a typical swimming pool, it's not healthy for the local wildlife, the birds that come and sort of drink from it. And it's not even healthy for humans or our skin. That's why every time we go out, we sort of clean ourselves, right? Like we take a shower. So here's just another principle of how, I won't get into any of these details. We are even experimenting with, here, this is an example of how, rather than pour concrete to create retaining walls, can we use trees and roots and plant them in a strategic way so that we don't need to pour concrete to build retaining walls. If you see this over here, this is an example of how just planting aloe vera and lemongrass reduces the requirement of pouring concrete for retaining wall by up to 60-70% because they have very, very, very deep roots. Again, just a very, how can we sort of think out of the box rather than take cookie cutter solutions that everyone thinks is the way to get things done, to create a possibility of a future where a lot of these options are actually achievable and realistic without requiring a huge sort of economic investment, So the challenge that I sort of gave myself was, can we do this at the same cost of a normal development? And the answer really is, that we can actually build all this out without spending more than you would on a conventional sort of real estate development as well. Any of you football fans, so I also run a football club called FC Goa. And here is a model, it looks a lot better over here, of a football campus and an international school that we have been planning. We're hoping to launch it and we were hoping to start it this year, but because of the pandemic, we've pushed our plans a little bit. So something that I was really, really conscious of was the fact that, football fields each football field requires about 1.5 lakh liters of water a day. And that's completely opposing to any sustainable principle, that we have. So how can we plan from the master planning stage our water management and our rainwater harvesting in a way that we will be able to be as conscious about our water consumption as possible? And how can we build while using the material which is there available on the land itself, right? So where our land is, there's a lot of laterite. So how can we use the laterite in a way that we excavate a lot of the laterite, we use it for our buildings, and we build a very, very, very beautiful campus, which is completely sustainable, as sustainable as possible, along with the SolarPunk principles that I spoke about earlier, but still is world-class, internationally acclaimed, and helping us produce great leaders and great football players. Again, some technical stuff I won't get into. And lastly, one of the projects that I want to sort of speak about is, for the last 5-6 years, I have been trying to figure out how there's about 210 odd football fields across Goa. This is a map of Goa and all the football fields that are there. And we've been trying to figure out how can we make these fields into community centers, but because they're not sort of managed and maintained in the way that they should be. So very recently, we've launched a project finally, and we've gotten funding for it, of how we can convert these existing grounds into community centers. And again, community and bringing communities together and having them have ownership over these local sort of fields in a way where they become like the local gymkhanas for the entire village is the model that we're sort of building out. These are all not-for-profit sort of models of how the community can take ownership over investment that we do in infrastructure in a particular area. And sports being a common sort of ground that everyone can get behind, and becomes a great way to involve communities on one common platform. Yeah, just so sci-fi has always sort of been kind of dystopian, and a big reason for that is because we haven't had solutions and we haven't had ideas of how a completely sustainable, equitable future can be actually imagined and built. But I would say now we've reached a point where we can imagine a sustainable, equitable, completely, decentralized sort of world. And we need to start doing sort of more of that. And SolarPunk and a lot of the work that I do is really just about creating hope. That like in the work that I do in football is all about, yes, it is possible for India to eventually play in the World Cup one day. It will take a lot of work, but we will get there. Yes, it is possible to do to do a profitable real estate development, which is completely sustainable and aspirational for, the rich and the poor. And yeah, that largely is the discussion that I sort of had in mind. And sort of, I'll end with this one quote that I got from this one user while I was doing my research on Tumblr, which is all about that we need to build a world like before we can live before we can live in a world of vertical gardens covering stained glass skyscrapers. We need to build a world of backyard gardens, boxes made of reclaimed wood. Before we can cover every rooftop with solar panels, we need to equip every home with the solar smokeless cooking made of scrap metal. The appeal of those green cityscapes in a pretty pictures isn't just that that they're high-tech and clean, it's that they sprout from a society that values compassion, the environment and human lives more than it values profit. And we need to build a society first, and we need to build it from the ground up with what we have available. And the SolarPunk future is for our grandchildren, and our job is to pave the way for it. That's kind of my talk. I usually rely a lot on audience reaction and how people are sort of talking and feeling, and not being able to see all of you is a big no-no for me. I'm happy to share this presentation. Another thing is, if any of you want to go out, sort of calculate your carbon footprint, I'll share this link with you all, and you can, answer a simple questionnaire in 5 or 6 minutes, and you'll be able to get a value of how much carbon you create personally. If any of you want to ever get in touch with me, you can write to me as well. And all the references and links of most of the sort of conversations that I had today is over here. So if anyone wants to sort of dig deeper or look into it, I'm happy to share this as well. Yeah, so thank you very much.
That was a really enlightening session. I mean, it opened our eyes. And when we heard the term SolarPunk and net positive living, we didn't know what it meant. But now when we researched and when we found out, we realized that it could be amazing. So one thing I remember, Greta Thunberg, she was talking about how sustainability should be, imposed and everything. And the Russian, Putin responded by saying that even people in Africa would want to be as rich as the ones in Switzerland. So I think this is the answer to that. I mean, things connected. So what do you think about that? I mean, can we tell Putin that this is the solution? They can be as rich as, yeah. Yes, sir.
you know, being rich to me is more about, I think someone who's rich is someone who has opportunity, and someone who has a community and family. Uh, like I think it's sort of, you know, you are like I read one of these memes recently, or a quote, which was that, that like you can be replaced in your job, but you cannot be replaced in your family. Like don't forget that. Like, and the reason I say that is because, like we are all fooled by capitalism and consumerism into constantly thinking that this is what I need tomorrow and this is what I need to be chasing. And like the truth is that, you know, like a roof over your head, access to power, access to data, access to good nutritious food is like it's pretty much what anybody needs to be on an equitable platform as anybody else in the world today. And we have the technology and the means to be able to provide that for all 7 billion humans that are there. So I hope it's a matter of time that we're able to grow past this, dog eat dog world mentality of greed, and like just chasing things, and people eventually sort of grow out of it. But touch wood, I hope that happens, and I'm pretty sure Putin is wrong about his assertion there.
Yes, sir. I mean, that was a very good perspective on it. And it was, in the session as a whole, it was very good. So, and I'm sure the audience and the attendees have a lot of questions. So
Sure.
let's go over to the Q&A session. Maybe please have your
Sure.
questions, everyone, attendees. Feel free to drop in your questions. And you may please raise your hand as well. The host will give the permission to talk.
Can I request that you guys put on your videos so I can just
Yes,
see
sir.
who's
I mean, are we visible? Yes.
Yeah,
just,
you,
yeah.
you are visible, but
Yes, sir.
most people can. Right, good to see everyone's faces. Yeah. Any questions? I promise I won't bite.
So one question we received, I personally received from Disha, who is an attendee, is, sir, it is always seen that a person learns the art of living through their passion and the field they specialize in. And you have, you have seen how sustainability can be applied in football, and you learned, in the football field, as you were talking about, and you saw how, and you learned a lot through your passion, which is football. Would you like to tell us about how football helped you learn and understand life?
So I have one confession to make, which is that I got into this position of FC Goa more incidentally. It's not something that I was chasing. It kind of just happened as a big coincidence while I was moving to Goa. But what I've learned from football, so like I played football growing up as a kid. I was in my school team. I played FIFA like a lot of people, but that doesn't prepare you for running a football club. And I was kind of thrown into this deep end and had to figure it out from scratch. And the biggest learning I had was, you like start with the basics, start with what you don't know. And I spent about a good 1.5 years just sort of learning, reading. I traveled to a lot of football clubs around the world to see how they run. And I didn't just go to the best football clubs. I went to even the lower division football clubs, and I kind of learned. And I had this big imposter syndrome of, hey, I don't know anything about this, but I'm still, I'm not experienced in this. And kind of just stuck to the basics. Like a lot of people talk about what needs to get done, but very few people actually stick to those basic sort of principles. And that, I mean, something that I've been able to do in football is follow my gut, not get influenced by the noise, because there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of fan opinion, there's a lot of media opinion, there's a lot of articles being written, there's everyone's constantly sharing their thoughts and ideas of what you should do. And if you have the conviction of and confidence, I mean, or rather, you have to build your own conviction. You have to build and work on your confidence to be able to ignore all of that noise and just follow through with whatever you think you need to do is the basics.
Yes, sir. I mean, that is amazing, Disha. That was a very good question. It helped us all, I mean, understand that aspect of it. And next we have a question from Nandana. Nandana?
Yeah, the question is written down, right? So
Yeah.
Right. So questions that, I mean, like, how do I manage so many things while and how is my time management or tips on time management? I have one notebook here. I have maybe 5 or 6 abandoned notebooks over there. I have Google Calendar. I have online sheets. I have Excel sheets. I have one company being managed on Basecamp. I have one company being managed on Asana. The truth is that I'm not really good at time management. But what I've learned over the last 15 years, 16 years of working is stop planning for one day, 10 days, a month, or even a quarter. Even most companies, even at CEO level, a lot of the people mistake of planning their time 3 months at a time or 4 months at a time. Like it might sound a bit absurd, but I would say plan for 10 years. Like most of you are what, about 20 years old, 20, 18, 19, 20, 21. Like if you really want to manage your time well, write down where you want to be when you're 30 years old, write down where you want to be when you're 40 years old, and then kind of realize, what, I have 10 years to do this. I have 10 years to do this. You have all the time and space to do everything that you want. Because if you get lost in planning for what I have to do tomorrow and what I have to do in a month and what I have to do in 3 months, it's going to be riddled with anxiety like any of us. And I'm no stranger to that. So don't plan for a day, a week, a month, 3 months. Plan for 3 years, plan for 5 years, and then allow yourself the space to get there. Nothing happens in a month, nothing happens in 3 months. Very few things happen in a year. I mean, the last thing I'll say on that is, people tend to overestimate how much they can do in 1 year. Everyone overestimates how much they can do in 1 year, but everyone underestimates how much they can get done in 10 years. So the long-term view and like my strength, I would say, in time management is I don't beat myself up about not getting things done, on a strict timeline, because my timelines are 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
Thank you so much for that answer, sir. It was really, actually, I got some points to note on when I'm going to live my life. So, go ahead. So, I guess we have another question too. Right, Sneha?
Yeah, please post your questions. I think someone had raised their hands. Oh yeah, Nancy. Yeah, you can ask the question, please.
Yeah, sure. Sir, like many people are saying that the main reason behind this pandemic is because of our carelessness and because we are over exploiting the nature too much from the last few decades. So how do you think that sustainable development can help us in avoiding another pandemic?
Well, I'm no expert, on pandemics, but like I think that we are we have been incubated, our thinking has been incubated, our brains have been conditioned, our emotions have been conditioned around this sort of feedback loop of, this is what you want to achieve, this is what you have to buy, this is how you have to marry, this is what your wedding photos need to look like, this is what your home needs to look like, you need to have these many plants, you should have pets, you should have this, you should have that. So we're kind of caught in this feedback loop of always feeling insecure about not having enough, or chasing, what society kind of thinks of you or expects from you. And as long as we're doing that, and as long as we're chasing without thinking for ourselves, another pandemic, another, global sort of catastrophe in the form of, like to me, climate change is perhaps a bigger problem. Unless we kind of take a step back, and most people are able to imagine that, what, they have enough. Your generation, from what I read and what I hear, is not as big on buying a home as the previous generations have been obsessed with buying homes. The shared economy and shared living and, shared experiences and, traveling the world, and all of a sudden experiences are more important. So like, I don't have the answer to your question, but I think the answer kind of lies in changing our obsession with this sort of capitalistic rat race, because that's not going to get us anywhere. And, that's not something you and I have control over. We have, it has to be, but, just that sort of simple realization that you are able to live sustainably, in a very simple way, if you just simply choose to want a different kind of lifestyle, it sort of helps with that sort of initial thought process. Not sure if I answered your question correctly, but yeah, that's what I have to share.
Okay, thank you, sir.
We have a question in the Q&A session from Nyasha Mishra, sir. As the title of this session is Net Positive Living, we can't help but ask you the question which almost every student is struggling with in these unprecedented times. Almost all of us have felt our growth become stagnant and possibilities crashed due to the pandemic and lockdown. We can't bring back the crucial times we lost, which forms a vital period of our career. How can one achieve positive living and positive mindset in such a situation of irrevocable loss? As you said, 10 years. Those targets.
I don't see it as a loss. And I'll sort of refer back to the answer I kind of gave to Nandana, like at your age, I completely understand that you feel like you've lost out on time, and you've lost out on, a lot of experiences that you could have had at that time. But my response to that, what I felt like was I gained time, I gained family time, I enjoyed the home that I'd worked really hard to kind of have, but never had time to spend enough time inside. I enjoyed spending time with my pets. I had 4 cats and 2 dogs. And, I spent a lot more time with my wife, my family, and I felt like I gained time, so it's just a matter of perspective. But, to someone like yourself, who's just starting out their careers, I would say you haven't lost any time. You haven't lost anything in your career, Again, think long term, think where you want to be, not when you're 25, not when you're 30 years old, or, think 10 years from now, think 20 years from now, and be a lot more patient with yourself, don't, we have the story of the founder of Nykaa, who started her entrepreneurial journey at the age of 50, right? And at, before she turned 60, she's now a multi-billionaire, right? And started something from scratch, right? So this idea that you're losing time, for your career is a lie. You haven't lost time in your career. You, if anything, the only place I think, from everything I've learned, is that you've lost. If you ever lose time, it's I mean, if you lose time, like you've lost it at a personal level. Like you've lost, like say by the time you're 50 years old, you're going to be thinking back and looking like, okay, now how do I spend more time with my family? How do I spend more time with my, like with my loved ones? And career stops being as important as wanting, as what the career is for. I mean, the career is to enable you to start having a better quality of life. Like a career is there to enable you to spend better quality time with your family. A career is there to give you resources to have, travel and better experiences around the world. So focus on, who you are and what you want, and how can you be a better person rather than how can you be a better career person. I've been always very anti, consumerism. So, like, not going to get any career kind of supportive answers from me. I apologize. Anything else?
Yeah, there are two questions in the chat box. Maybe we can combine them. One is from Shelby and one is from Nandana. Did you always know your strengths and weaknesses, and what are the things that you want to, follow ahead in the future in your life? And Nandana has asked, what would be the most important message you'd like to give to the upcoming generation to live a sustainable and harmonious life?
Did I always know my strengths and weaknesses? No. I feel like even today, even now, I'm constantly learning about what my strengths are. When you get too complacent in thinking, okay, these are my strengths, then, kind of reality will slap you in the face at some point, and all of a sudden you realize that, oh, you know what, I've been thinking I was doing this right for all these years, and all of a sudden I've had this realization that actually I was just being an arrogant, asshole, or I was just sort of patting myself on the back on the wrong sort of thing. So, you never really stop learning about yourself. I think it would be arrogant for anyone to say that they know what their strengths and weaknesses are right at the beginning. It's a continuous process. It never stops. That being said, I would encourage you to write your strengths and weaknesses, at the first week of every single year. It's like, okay, what do I think my strengths and weaknesses are this year? And I promise you, every single year you would have a updated version of that. And many things that you thought were your strengths, you realize perhaps are not your strengths. And many things that you thought were your weaknesses actually will turn out to be your strengths, 10 years later. So, yeah, don't look to define yourself at such a young age. I would say I didn't really know who I was, until my 30s. 20s are all for experimentation. I would encourage all of you to go out there and experiment with every single career option, travel option, partner, whatever you want to experience. This is the time to kind of do that. And after you've done all of those things, do you really, only after, and this is something I complain about people who are in their 20s, because I hire a lot of people in their 20s, and I'm like, you know what, sometimes for certain roles, I in fact tell my HR person, okay, no one below 28 for this role. And the reason for that is because they don't yet know who they are or what they want, and that's okay. The idea is you don't know who you are going to change careers. You are going to probably go through 3-4 different jobs before you really know what you want to do, because until now you've not really even experienced. You discover a whole new side of yourself, like when you do your first job. Then you're like, oh, who is this person? I have never met this person before, and that's someone that can only really come out when you start doing something. Yeah.
So that
and
was, yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, sir. You were saying something.
Oh no. I was just reading the next question if there was any. Yeah. What message would I like to give for the upcoming generation to live a sustainable and harmonious life? I would say, you know, start being mindful of what you are doing today. Like that test that like that link that I had at the end of the presentation, which enables everybody to calculate their carbon footprint. Like I'll share that with you guys. So like just start being mindful of who you are, and like what kind of impact you're having on the planet. Just take some time to kind of think about that on a regular basis. Like the food you eat, how many times you order from outside, how much waste is being produced, are you segregating, are you leaving your lights and air conditioning and all those things on? I mean, I'm now that guy who yells at people for leaving the lights and the ACs on, the same way we were yelled at. I mean, I was yelled at by my parents for. I mean, those are very small things, but just having that sort of mindfulness and awareness over how much you are actually consuming and how much you're actually contributing to the planet. Start there. Like, do you have the awareness of knowing how much carbon footprint you are causing? How many flights do you take a year? How many, like do you travel by public transport or your personal car? And like, just being aware of that is the step number one. Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Can I get a word in, Sneha?
Yes, sir, of course.
Before I pass it on to Anubhav, I'm just thinking one very simple thing. I'm glad I got you on to speak, Akshay.
Thank you, sir.
Enjoyed it, and you have passed on some very, how shall I say, essentials in a very sort of a casual, carefree, easygoing manner, which is what is the need of the hour, rather than academic discussions and seminars and so on. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And Sneha, Anubhav wants to say something.
Yeah, this was, like Sneha said, very enlightening. And we forever, and this is being directed to the speaker, we forever say that we are in step with times because we are constantly teaching the 18-year-olds. But to provide them with visions which are not necessarily dystopic is increasingly becoming important. We are running out of ideas to give them, not an apocalyptic vision of the world. And literature tends to do that, tends to show you the worst. And I always say the final year students get the worst in their literature, reading T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf, etc., etc. So this was very refreshing, and heartiest congratulations that you could carry out a career in sustainable development, which in itself is a huge landmark. I hear a lot of young people taking to it. Tell me something. I have a couple of questions. These were general observations.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So one, whether Goa is one of those states which believes in an alternative discourse, or the punk culture, which now is looking into also sustainable development, besides being also having an underbelly of drugs and other things. How is it that you are based in Goa? Not just because I'm sure of your love for football. And remember growing up watching a lot of Salgaonkar football matches. Anyway, that's an aside. But why Goa? One, it's a general question, general query. And the other thing is, how expensive is this dream of sustainable development? All these technologies that you talk about, they are mind-bogglingly interesting. So are they all native? Are they all available? You're exploring them and hence collating them so that others can draw upon it as a blueprint and can get them replicated. So I want to know, what is the indigenous knowledge that you're using? How expensive is this, and why Goa?
I think Sir left the meeting. Maybe he had a network issue. Okay, he'll be joining back.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Meanwhile, I request all the attendees to fill the feedback form.
Yeah,
Now
please
we
fill the
drop in the chat
feedback
box.
form.
You want to find out whether he's being able to log in again?
He's
So
back.
Yes,
He's
ma'am.
back.
Sir is back.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry, my internet call.
Yeah. So do you want me to repeat myself, or shall I? How do you want to do it? Two questions. One, Goa. The other was
The last thing I heard was until the. Yeah, I didn't get the second question. If you could repeat the second question.
how expensive is this career in sustainable development? How expensive will it be if we are to use those mind-bogglingly interesting technology, which is needed to be put in place in order to have this kind of a sustainable development? Are you using a lot of indigenous technology also? Are you exploring this research to be used as a blueprint later?
Yeah.
I think sir is facing a network issue.
I think there is a lag also.
Yes, ma'am.
I can always type it out, but otherwise it's not important.
Maybe I can call and find out. Until then, participants, please fill the feedback form.
I think he has left again. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir is
He's,
back.
he's back.
Yeah. Sorry. So Goa, like I'll answer the first question. I grew up as a IAS son's. Like an IAS officer's son, and so we moved around all the time. So I was never really married to, the idea of one particular place being home, and I had that opportunity of calling a place a home, and I used to come to Goa for the parties and the subcultures and the beach and all of these things since I was 16 years old, and so I just really loved Goa because it was this little haven in India which was very accepting of different cultures and a very very liberal kind of a lifestyle as well, and that really appealed to me. When I started Skarma, which was my creative agency, I was shuttling between Bombay and Delhi quite a bit. I was working with the Ministry of External Affairs, helping with India's sort of public diplomacy. But during that time, I got more and more jaded with city life, and felt like felt literally stuck in a bit of a rat race, even though I was working for myself. My wife and I, so she's a furniture designer, and after we got engaged, we were in Bali actually, because she was in Bali sourcing some furniture for a project, and it was a long weekend, so I ended up joining her for the last 3 days while she was there, and we had rented this beautiful sort of house that we were staying in, and we were like, why don't we work towards having a life like this? It's beautiful and it's green and you're in nature, and her dad already had, my father-in-law already had certain businesses in Goa, and so we already kind of had like some support system if we needed it, even though we don't work with him directly, or at the time at least there was no involvement at all. Now I do some real estate projects with him. So it was just that, we were 29, 30. We had started our careers, but we had not, planted our roots. And we had that opportunity or that window to be able to, all right, if you're going to plant roots, let's plant them in a place which is, we're going to have this opportunity once, or at least that's what you feel like when you're young, right? I only have this opportunity once. I only have, and so we kind of just took the leap. And because I already had this habit of just moving around my entire life, for me, it felt like no big deal. For her, it was a very big sort of thing. So that's why we moved to Goa. and now I have a few businesses here, and she ended up setting up her furniture factory over here as well. So now we've planted our roots in Goa, and I see Goa as almost like a experiment. Goa is 196 panchayats, and each panchayat still has a lot of power. And a goal that I have, for the next 5 to 10 years, to convert one of these panchayats in model sustainable development, which is smart, which is green, which is technology advanced, which is a model of how something can be built. And I felt like if there's a place that can be done in India, it's Goa. We can be big fish in a small pond in Goa, but anywhere else in cities and stuff, like you're a big fish in the ocean, and it kind of doesn't matter. And so over here we're able to have some sort of like influence and some sort of control over what we want to do. So Goa for us means a lot of things, and so that's why Goa. In terms of the second question, I actually didn't hear it properly, but I'll try and answer it anyway. Is sustainability expensive? Is sustainable development expensive? That's kind of what I heard in that broken chatter.
Using native indigenous technologies, and whether you have now a database or a blueprint which others can draw upon and duplicate.
So we don't have I don't have a blueprint yet. In fact, we know that a lot of people have moved to Goa, especially after the pandemic, and a lot of the creative community, has moved here. You have a lot of architects, you have a lot of writers, you have a lot of designers. So I've been speaking to a bunch of my friends about how can we start bringing this community together, because you have these 1,000 independent bubbles, of small sort of communities, and we have to find a way to kind of bring them together. That's not been done yet. We want to do it. And I think more than expensive, the challenge is aspiration, because economics is like the economics checks out in terms of sustainable development, right? Like I've now spent money, time, and effort in trying to figure out whether the engineering and the economics works. And yes, I would say the engineering works, the economics work. The aspiration for it, which is, people can't imagine that for themselves yet. And that's where the challenge lies, right? If someone wants a dream home, they just want like a house with a garden and a swimming pool. Like what the house is made of, and how is the water managed, and where does the waste go, and that's not on anyone's mind yet. So like I think the challenge with sustainability is in that sort of awareness and behavior of having that ownership, and you asking those questions. People don't ask those questions of the builders, right? Like what building materials are you going to use? It's like it's assumed it's going to be concrete and steel. Like you don't have to ask. So those are the challenges. So we so my quest right now in the short term is to figure out how can we make it aspirational. Right? Like to own a Tesla now is aspirational. If like 15 years ago it wasn't, like it was only for the early adopters, right? So we're at that early adopter stage.
So even your Instagram ID is Tandon's. Oh, sorry, ma'am. Even your Instagram ID is Tandon's quest.
Oh yeah.
Ma'am,
Like
sorry.
that's because I went on this thing called Leaders Quest many years ago, and so since then I've kept it as that.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I have. So the idea of sustainability is normally seen as something which has always been there, which we lost it after the advent of this thing called industrialization, modernization, urbanization, progress. And now when we talk of SolarPunk and even net positive living, I don't think we are we understand sustainability in the sense of bringing back those indigenous knowledge. We are using modern technology. We are using all the benefits of modernity, progress, to make human life sustainable, or to sustain the nature. So one of my problems here is how feasible is the idea of this idea of SolarPunk. It is true that some of us can say that we are trying to be sustainable, but is this idea of sustainable, can it be implemented on a larger scale for the entire nation or for the entire globe? What is the scope of this?
Yeah, so sort of like I was mentioning earlier, I mean, like one of my short, dreams is to be able to show an example of one village being completely sustainable, as doing it in a way, I would say, which is a amalgamation of new technology along with ancient wisdom, because not everything ancient and old school was necessarily sustainable. Like we did wipe out practically every large mammal species that was there. As we took over more and more land, we did wipe out forests across the entire world. So there is a lot of ancient wisdom that is relevant in terms, especially in the world, in the fields of agriculture and sustainable farming, and in terms of technology today allows us to test and bring sort of engineering viability to old techniques that can then be scaled up. So for example, I showed you, I had a slide on rammed earth, which is a very old ancient technology, right, of mud houses, brick home, and all of that. But stabilized rammed earth is using technology to give it that engineering sort of tick mark that it works on a large scale, and being able to deploy that on a sustainable, scalable manner is what technology will allow us to do. That being said, to answer your question, I think once we have a model for one village or one small town or one large city, India still has some 800 million people that live in rural settings, rural or suburban sort of settings. So there is scope for perhaps, tens of thousands of villages that need to eventually be built. And I don't think, like for the longest time, it's almost been considered inevitable that people are going to move to the cities. But I think what the pandemic has shown us, and I think what work from home has shown us, is that moving to the cities is perhaps not a complete inevitability. People can work out of anywhere. And in the future, working out of a, like a beautiful small town, which is very well connected, because everything will be very well connected as, sort of development happens. And I mean, according to me, the scope just within India is that we're going to need perhaps, 1 lakh new sustainable villages and towns over the next 50, 60 years. So we have to show how to do one in the next 4 or 5. We have to implement a dozen in the next 10 years. And then once the model is tested and proven enough, then hopefully over the, by the time these kids are 50, 60, we're going to have like thousands and thousands of them. Yeah.
One of the things that I liked, you began with the reference to Elon Musk, and I guess the route to sustainability is also deeply connected with how capitalism also works, because maybe I think for the first time in the history he made space travels, or he was trying to make it sustainable, like reusing, recycling, instead of simply starting everything from scratches. He started this idea, he brought this idea of working with rockets that have been already used. So maybe I think we have something to take from, normally we see capitalism as the devil, as the, as the villain who makes nature, who is against nature, who is killing nature, who is stopping sustainability. So some kind of a lesson there as well.
Yeah, like I think it's greed is the villain, and like we haven't yet reached a place with humanity where we can agree on a sort of moral code that everyone can sort of agree on. Like we're not there yet. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges to capitalism. Of course, it has its sort of benefits, but unchecked capitalism and unchecked consumerism definitely has its evils as well.
Moderation is the word. But it's been really enlightening, these new ideas, new ways of looking at world, living with the world, with nature. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we can take a group photo right now before we move on to the voter thanks.
Thank
That
you,
is how it
Sneha,
happens.
for...
Screenshot. These days.
I guess I am also visible.
No, sir, you aren't visible. Yes, sir, now you're visible.
Okay.
I request the panelists to switch on the cameras. Ranveer, sir. Okay, I'll just take the, oh, thank you, sir. I'll just take the screenshot. Everyone say cheese. Okay, done. Thank you so much, everyone.